Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope that everybody can hear me. Could I please just have an indication from the attendees as well as the panelists if you can hear me? Can I just have confirmation from the interpreter if she can hear me, Deline? Okay. I see that a lot of people are still joining in, so we will begin in the next 5 minutes. Apologies for the delay, whilst we sort out the technical issues with our interpreter. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope that everyone can hear me. Whilst we're waiting for the language interpreter to, okay, she can hear me, everything is great. Apologies for the delay. And thank you so much to everyone for attending. My name is Pina Sakati. I will be the moderator for this event. And we will just start right off. So today's webinar is on Ratify ADRP, and we have civil society organizations which have come to sort of give insight as to how we can encourage African states to ratify the African Disability Protocol. So without wasting any time, I will hand over to Wilson, who will be introducing all of the panelists. Wilson Macharia is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. He's a two-term researcher at the Center of Human Rights, University of Pretoria. He holds an LLB degree from the University Nairobi School of Law and a postgraduate diploma from the Kenya School of Law. He's also a doctoral candidate at the University of Pretoria. His goal is to build a career around promoting the application of the human rights-based approach with respect to inclusion from theory to practice in Kenya and Africa. Wilson, I'm going to hand over to you now.
All right. Thank you very much, Penyo, and everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you clearly, Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, good day, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. We invite you as on behalf of the Center for Human Rights, my manager who's currently on leave, and by extension on behalf of the management of the Center for Human Rights. So the Center for Human Rights, as most of you would know, is an academic department situated in the law faculty of the University of Pretoria. But at the same time, it is an NGO with observer status with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And we have both of those components working together, and I think today's event brings together both components. On the one hand, we have the students from the Human Rights and Democratization in Africa Master's Program, which I also undertook in 2020, undertaking a campaign to advocate for the ratification of the Africa Disability Protocol. So the NGO part is we have different units within the center, one of them being the Disability Rights Unit. And one of the projects that we are coordinating right now is on the ratification campaign of the Africa Disability Protocol. But generally at the center, we are also advocating for ratification of other protocols, for instance, the Older Persons Protocol, and the recently adopted protocol on social assistance that was adopted by the African Union Commission in February 2022. So I think we would need to celebrate so far the countries or states that have ratified the Africa Disability Protocol. These include Rwanda, Kenya, and Mali, and also perhaps the countries that have signed the protocol. So far we have about 11 signatures. But however, for the Africa Disability Protocol to come into force, we need a minimum of 15 ratifications, which brings us all to this event. We hope that at the end of it, we shall identify strategies in which CSOs in different countries and those who even have a regional influence can undertake to speed the ratification of the Africa Disability Protocol. I know that among the panelists, I was just going through the list, we have panelists both from countries that have ratified the Africa Disability Protocol, but also panelists from states which have ratified the protocol or rather acceded to the protocol like Kenya. So I hope that we shall also learn from each other what strategies have worked so far, what hasn't worked so far, and how can we collaborate moving forward to ensure that we celebrate the ratification or the coming into force of this protocol. I have been termed as being overly ambitious by hoping that we can celebrate this by the end of the year, hopefully by the 3rd of December, which is International Disability Day. But I believe it is possible if we all take strategic steps to ensure that this comes into place. As I finalize, I personally am a person with a disability. I identify as a person with a disability. I have a visual impairment, and I see the aspirations that I have as an African person with disability in the Africa Disability Protocol, most of which are not encompassed in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I believe that that is also the position of other persons with disabilities in the region. Importantly, as we shall come to learn, it also enshrines some duties that I have as a person with disabilities, or a person with a disability, of making sure that the advancement of human rights in Africa actually take place. So I hope that at the end of this year or moving forward, then I and other persons with disabilities shall celebrate these aspirations and promises as per the protocol. Otherwise, to welcome you to the webinar and hope that it's a learning process for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wilson. Thank you for the introduction. I think one thing that is very important about this webinar is sort of trying to encapsulate a more contemporary approach to ratifying the ADRP, as opposed to just the legalistic sort of things that we are usually told about. So we want to include CSOs in this initiative because they can provide a more contemporary, more approachable sort of perspective to states when encouraging them to ratify the treaty. And on that note, I will hand over to Mr. Paul Juma, who will be unpacking the protocol itself. Mr. Paul Juma is a researcher with the Center for Human Rights. He is also a doctoral student at the University of Pretoria. He holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, a postgraduate diploma in law from the Kenya School of Law, and a Master of Laws degree in disability rights from the University of Pretoria. Mr. Paul Juma, you are free to take the floor whenever you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, I'll be taking you through the African Disability Rights Protocol. But before I get to that, I want us to look at the rights of persons with disability under the African Human Rights Architecture prior to the African Disability Rights Protocol. Generally, the African Human Rights Architecture recognizes the rights of persons with disabilities. It does so implicitly and explicitly. Implicitly, for example, in Article 2 of the African Charter, which provides for the right against discrimination, but does not specifically provide for persons with disabilities. However, persons with disabilities are covered under the phrase other status. Explicitly, in provisions such as Article 23, sub-Article 2 of the Maputo Protocol, where women with disabilities are explicitly identified. However, the problem with this African Human Rights Architecture prior to the African Disability Protocol was the issue of fragmentation. So you will find that different categories of persons are covered under different instruments. For example, children with disabilities are provided for under the African Children's Charter. Youth with disabilities are provided for under the African Youth Charter, women with disabilities under the Maputo Protocol, displaced persons with disability under the Kampala Protocol. So this fragmentation of human rights makes it very difficult to implement these rights. The other issue with the African Human Rights Architecture prior to the African Disability Protocol was the issue of the charity and medical model of disability. So you will find that in certain instruments, they were providing for certain provisions such as special care and protection of persons with disabilities and rehabilitation of persons with disabilities, which are medical and charity based. For example, under Article 23A of the Maputo Protocol, you will find state parties being urged to undertake and ensure protection of women with disabilities, Similarly, in Article 13.1 of the African Children's Charter, which provides for special measures of protection of children with disabilities. Also, under the African Charter, you'll find phrases such as handicapped children, which are charity and medical model based. So the African Disability Rights Protocol rejects the charity and medical model of disability, and instead it adopts the human rights model of disability. Now, the human rights model of disability considers persons with disabilities as subjects of human rights as opposed to objects of pity. Now, the African Human Rights, the African Disability Rights Protocol builds on the CRPD. It reaffirms the rights as provided for under the CRPD. For example, what do I mean? You'll find a right such as the right to equality and non-discrimination, which is provided for under Article 5 of the CRPD, is also reaffirmed by the African Disability Rights Protocol under Article 5 and 6. Also, the right to equal recognition before the law, which is provided for in Article 12 of the CRPD, is also provided for in Article 7 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. The right to life, Article 10 of the CRPD, is also provided for in Article 8 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. The right to liberty and security of the person under Article 14 of the CRPD is provided for in Article 9 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. The right to freedom from torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment, Article 15 of the CRPD, is also provided for in Article 10 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. Access to justice, Article 13 of the CRPD, and Article 13 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. Then the African Disability Rights Protocol also reformulates and extends certain rights as provided for in the CRPD. This means that it does not merely restate the rights under the CRPD, but it also extends them to suit the African context. So what do I mean? For example, the right to access to justice under the CRPD is also provided for under the African Disability Rights Protocol, but it has been extended to include customary law forms of justice, that is Article 13, Sub-Article 2. The right to living in the community, which is provided for under the CRPD, has also been reformulated and extended under the African Disability Rights Protocol, and it includes living independently in the community. The right to legal capacity has been extended to include right to hold documents of identity, that is Article 7.2F of the African Disability Rights Protocol. The right to habilitation and rehabilitation under the CRPD has been extended to include the requirement to develop, adopt, and implement standards that are suited to local conditions. The right to freedom from torture under the CRPD has been extended to include forced sterilization and other invasive procedures, that is Article 10. The right to work and employment under the CRPD has been extended to include enforcing minimum job quotas for employees with disabilities in the public sector, that is Article 19 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. The right to political and public participation has been extended to allow persons with disabilities to stand for and remain in office. Also, the African Disability Rights Protocol includes certain matters which are also specific to the African continent. For example, the provision against harmful practices under Article 11, Sub-Article 1 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. Then we also have the issue of persons with disabilities as duty bearers under Article 31 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. We also have the definition of deaf culture under Article 1 of the African Disability Rights Protocol. We also have youth with disabilities, Article 29, older persons with disabilities, Article 30. So now to conclude, you will notice that the African Disability Rights Protocol is not merely a replication of the CRPD. The African Disabilities Protocol speaks to the African context in a way that the CRPD does not. Therefore, the African Disability Rights Protocol has the potential to address the unique circumstances of persons with disabilities in Africa. So having ratified the CRPD alone is not enough. African states should be urged to also ratify the African Disability Rights Protocol for the reasons that I have stated above. So with those few remarks, I wish to thank you and hand over back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Paul. I think what is very interesting to take away from your presentation is the sort of different accommodations that are African-centric that are included in the African Disability Protocol. As you mentioned, deaf culture, the provision of harmful practices, youth with disabilities, and persons with disabilities as being rights bearers. These are all new concepts that aren't included in the CRPD that are included in the African Disabilities Protocol. And with that being said, I think it is also very fitting that the next panelist that we have will be talking about the intersectionalities that exist with persons with disabilities in Africa. I think that will also quite expand on the provisions that are included in the African Disability Protocol that aren't quite expanded on in the CRPD. And as our next panelist, we have Mr. Nchabeni Neshutini, who is the chairperson of the South African Disability Alliance and has also held this position since 2021. He is also the president of Blind SA and the chairperson of the Department of Basic Education's Braille Advisory Task Team. He holds an LLB degree from the University of South Africa and an LLM degree in International Human Rights Law, specializing in refugee status. He strongly believes in community support, inclusion, and accessibility, which should be underpinned by disability legislation. Mr. Nchabeni, the floor is now open to you.
Thank you, moderator, and good morning to the people on the call. It is my pleasure indeed to share the floor with the panelists who are here. I have chosen to be practical and broad in my approach to discuss intersectionality because the important dimension we need to identify when we discuss intersectionality is that it doesn't have to be attached to specific rules and instruments guiding it to achieve what it needs to achieve, but we need to approach it in a manner that seeks to address the practices and the collaborations that exist between people and in the personality themselves. In its very nature, disability does not exist as an isolated phenomenon. It coexists with other phenomena and it needs to thrive within that setup of coexistence. As a phenomenon, disability is multifarious and requires specific attention in order for countries to make sensible decisions in ensuring equity and equal access to the protection of disability-based rights. I'm sorry for that. The international bodies like the United Nations had put together generic legal instruments towards the protection and promotion of rights for all, including persons with disabilities. It did not come as a surprise that Africa also committed to protection of human rights, and in 1981, the African Charter on the Human and People's Rights was adopted. This move was a direct response to the Charter of the Organization of African Unity, which committed all state parties to ensure that human and people's rights are protected and promoted in order to achieve legitimate aspirations of people in Africa. The adoption of the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of persons with disabilities that colleagues have been speaking about in Africa came through as a result thereof. As such, disability finds itself intersecting with numerous other factors that shape the cause for redressing disability amid all these factors. Now, what do we mean by intersectionality? It is worth noting that persons with disabilities are normal human beings before they are persons with disabilities. It is for this reason that always a person comes before the condition disability. This person may have other intersecting phenomena with which they identify themselves. Intersectionality, as conceptualized by Crenshaw, describes the manner in which a person's diverse identities as causes for marginalization work conjunctively to impact that person. In other words, a person can be a disabled person, yet be a LGBTIQA plus person, or a person with a disability is of a particular race which could have been systematically marginalized in the past. The question, therefore, is what comes before what between the two intersecting phenomena. In cases, these rights need to equally be protected. Would a person with a disability in some country in Africa be imprisoned on the basis that he is gay? Would a non-Muslim person with a disability be killed for not being a Muslim in an African Islamic country? Crenshaw aptly puts it thus: intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. The reality is that these phenomena coexist, and when addressed, they must be addressed as one component. In Africa, poverty could be associated not only with the causes of disability, but intersects with disability and exacerbates the condition. Many persons with disabilities do not access resources that would have been meaningful in empowering them due to scarcity of resources, obviously. In most African countries, persons with disabilities do not access social security grants, for example, thus throwing them into the streets to beg. In the process, they become vulnerable and be exposed to conditions that deny them access to equal protection of their human rights. Behaviors of leaders also cause major discomfort and frustration. The throwing of disabled people in the dam by the president of Uganda, Idi Amin, in 1975 is one example of leaders who are insensitive towards persons with disabilities. Cultures and beliefs also intersect quite prominently with disabilities. Persons with albinism are being killed for muti or other purposes related to cultural beliefs. In other cultures, it is also believed that a person with a disability brings in the society fortunes, and thus they are held far beyond human natural esteem. Because of culturally inclined beliefs, certain communities perceive children with disabilities in families or societies as a curse or as punishment meted by either ancestors or the gods as a correction to the deeds performed by their parents or some relatives in their family. All these factors are a manifestation of coexistence of disability with other personal and extrinsic factors that influence and make up their lives. Whether they accept themselves to live within such conditions or they give up in life and become worthless as a result of these beliefs and cultural manifestations. In conclusion, colleagues, it must be mentioned that disability will always intersect with other phenomena and will never be isolated. The interconnectedness of our continent's states shall play a role in the manner in which one society interacts with the other, thus transferring some of the norms and practices that intersect with disability to other societies and nuanced systems that might negatively or positively manifest themselves. The influx of persons with disability, including persons with disabilities, in countries with more economic advantages is also necessitated by the phenomena that affect all those who are fleeing. In this scramble for better social, economic, and perhaps religious opportunities, disability will always triangulate with all other causes for the influx. It is thus due to the interconnectedness that countries should strive to have a common approach through an instrument like the Protocol on Disability Rights to ensure that rights and other freedoms are protected and promoted through a golden thread. Resultantly, it remains with both governments, organizations of persons with disabilities, regional and continental bodies to join hands to work towards the achievement of the noble cause to genuinely protect and promote the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa. I thank you, moderator, for the opportunity, and I trust this is going to spark some discussions genuinely to address all these factors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nchabeni, for your very, very insightful presentation. Just to expand on what you mentioned, I think it is very important that we understand that in terms of considering the intersectionalities that exist with persons with disabilities, we need to appreciate that there are, different vulnerabilities that different people experience, and that these are should be considered as as holistically as possible. So just as an example, I remember in one of the webinars that I attended, there was an example that was given of a white cis man with a disability and how their experience would be very different to a person of color who's female and maybe is also a sexual minority. So I think these are things that we need to take into consideration in tandem with how cultures and beliefs together with socioeconomic realities also play a role in the marginalization of different groups of persons with disabilities. I'd also just like to remind the attendees as well as the panelists that if should you have any questions, you may leave them in the Q&A box, and should you have any comments, you're more than welcome to leave them in the chat box. There is a time allocated for questions and answers. However, you are free to ask any questions now within the Q&A box, should you wish to do so. I will next I'll hand over to Ms. Sally Nduta, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the United Disabled Persons of Kenya. Sally is a disability rights champion with 12 years experience in disability and development. She currently works at the UDPK as the Chief Executive Officer. Before joining the UDPK in 2017, she worked at the African Union of the Blind, the UFUB, for 8 years, serving in various roles, including serving as a project manager. She is very passionate about the human rights approach, capacity, strengthening, and meaningful participation of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations. Ms. Sally Nduta, I hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Finyo. Good afternoon from Nairobi and good morning, wherever you may be. I'm really happy to participate in this webinar this afternoon to share the role of civil society organizations in ratification of the Africa Disability Protocol. I want to restrict my discussion to the role of organizations of persons with disabilities as CSOs in the ratification process. As it was said earlier, Kenya has ratified the protocol in November of 2011. So I just wanted to share our experience as organizations of persons with disabilities in the process. UDPK is the umbrella organization of organizations of persons with disabilities in Kenya. Our role is to advocate for inclusion of disability concerns or issues of persons with disabilities in legislation, in programming, in decision-making, and in service delivery. Besides that, we also build capacity of our members who are organizations of persons with disabilities to be able to engage at their own local level to ensure that their rights are included. For purposes of those who may not know, it's good to explain what an organization of persons with disabilities is. So these would be organizations that are governed and managed by persons with disabilities themselves. They're about representation, they're about advancement and advocacy of rights of persons with disabilities. They are founded on the rallying call, "Nothing about us without us." Actually, these days we say "nothing without us." For Kenya, our government committed to ratify the Africa Disability Protocol just before the Global Disability Summit, the first one that was held in 2018. Kenya co-hosted that summit. So just before the summit, a few months before, we had our own pre-summit where we sat as stakeholders, both the government and other disability stakeholders, to plan our participation at the summit that was held in London. So the disability sector at that point had been engaging with government and pushing for government of Kenya to ratify the convention. So we were really happy that as we were planning for the Global Disability Summit in May 28th, we were glad to note that the government among the commitments it made at the summit was on the ratification of the Africa Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights, on the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa. Let me just note that participation is really important, and it is a right. People must be involved in decision-making at all levels. And as organizations of persons with disabilities, we are constantly pushing for persons with disabilities to be informed and to be involved at all stages when the government was ratifying the convention. We really push for meaningful involvement and meaningful participation of organizations of persons with disabilities, as is enshrined by our constitution and also by the UNCRPD Article 4.3 and Article 33.3. So specifically, what have our roles been, or what have our roles been as OPDs in ratification of the process? We engaged in a lot of sensitization of persons with disabilities themselves and their organizations on the content of the protocol. We also mobilized persons with disabilities and the OPDs to participate in stakeholder sensitization sessions that were organized by both by government and other actors on the treaty-making process and what ratification entails. We had sessions with the Office of the Attorney General who took stakeholders through the constitutional implications of ratifying the protocol. Importantly, our role as an OPD was to articulate the need to ensure barriers to participation are removed, to ensure that all persons with different disabilities engaging on an equal basis during these sessions. So in Kenya, the government is required by our constitution before making any decisions or before ratifying any treaties to ensure that they engage the public through public participation, through creating awareness and also informing them of what the process is involved. So in Kenya, the government organized forums to create that public awareness. They made an initial advertisement. And for us as an OPD was to make sure that persons with disabilities were aware of this call for public participation. So we ensured that that information was disseminated and these notices were made available to persons with disabilities. We participated in a public participation forum that was held in January 2020, where the ministry in partnership with the African Union of the Blind held an advocacy forum to raise awareness on the protocol. We also had a TV program that was aired 4 times on a national television. We also held panel discussions and participated in this to ensure that we are calling on the general public also to be involved in supporting the ratification of the protocol. So as OPDs and other disabilities in Kenya, as I indicated earlier, we played a critical role in advocating for the government of Kenya to ratify the protocol. Now that the protocol has been ratified in November of 2021, we have a role to ensure that we monitor the implementation of the protocol, because it doesn't just stop with ratification. We have a continuous work to ensure that the government monitors, that the government keeps its word and implements the provisions of the protocol, just like we monitor the implementation of other treaties, like the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which also Kenya has ratified, and the SDGs. Together with national laws and other policies. So the other bit of work is around monitoring the implementation of the ADP. We want to ensure that we move beyond ratification to ensure that the principles are implemented in government planning, in decision making, and in programs. Thank you so much. That has been our experience as organizations of persons with disabilities in Kenya. Thank you so much. Back to you, Fina.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nduda. We really appreciate your presentation. I think one thing that is very important to take away from what you said is that Kenya has not only just ratified the protocol, but has taken measures to ensure its actual implementation and enforcement. And I think the public participation and having monitoring mechanisms in place to ensure accountability by all stakeholders within the state is very, very important. And it is something that we aim to sort of encourage states to do once they have in fact ratified the protocol. I will now hand over to two panelists who will be conjunctively giving their presentations. So the next two panelists are Griet van der Woorde and Shataya Atawes. Griet van der Woorde is a regional project manager at Handicap International, Humanity and Inclusion. And Ms. Shataya Atawes is a director for advocacy and communication with the African Disability Forum. She holds a BA degree in foreign language and literature, as well as a master's degree in gender studies from Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. She has also earned a diploma in mainstream disability equality in the world of work from the International Labour Organization's Training Center in Italy. She has more than 20 years of progressive work experience in disability inclusive development programs of different organizations. Currently, she's working for the African Disability Forum with the capacity of Director for Advocacy and Communication. I was informed that Ms. Griet van der Woorde will be going first, and thereafter Ms. Shataya Atawes will be giving her presentation, and I will now hand over the floor to you, Ms. van der Woorde. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like to share my screen if possible.
You should be able to share your screen as you have been designated as a panelist. So please just let me know.
Now it's okay. It was disabled, okay. But now it's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. If all is okay, you should see something on the screen.
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
I can see.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So thank you first of all for the opportunity. So as mentioned, I'm Griet van der Woorde. I'm working for Handicap International, Humanity and Inclusion. And together with African Disability Forum, we have a common project working on the ratification of the African Disability Protocol. And it's in light of this that we wanted as well to give perspective of civil society as done before with UDPK, but now at, let's say, INGO level. So just a few introduction before I pass the floor to Ms. Shitai. So why is an INGO as Humanity and Inclusion investing in this, in the African Disability Protocol? Well, first of all, it's part of HI's, let's say, 10-year organizational strategy, where we mentioned that we want to be leading the promotion and ensuring the inclusion of people with disabilities and vulnerable populations. And also we have a social and inclusion strategy for 5 years, where similarly, we want to promote the participation, inclusion, and accountability at all levels, local, national, and within public disability governance. Also, it highlights that it's important to work with civil society, recognizing and favoring the participation of a diverse and legitimate, representative and efficient civil society at every level, at different levels, and whether regarding the disability movement, through organization of persons with disabilities. And our global aim is to support disability inclusive governance at local, national and international levels in accordance with international standards such as the UNCRPD and the SDGs, but as well, of course, the Africa Disability Protocol. So this is why an INGO as HI is active in or supporting this work. And then it's very concretely in 2019 or before 2019, HI was already working with the West Africa Federation of Persons with Disabilities, WAFOD in English and FOAF in French. And then there was a very concrete funding opportunity from the Norwegian corporation which was labeled as Realizing the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And its objective was really as well to make sure that the realization of human rights within the framework of the UN SDGs. And it's a 3-year project. So for this reason, as it's a longer term project, it focuses on human rights. It was an perfect opportunity to work with African Disability Forum as the legitimate representative of persons with disabilities at the Pan-African level. Also, ADF was considered the perfect interlocutor for the African Union in representing groups, representing persons with disabilities. And we also saw it as an opportunity for ADF to support its members in capacity strengthening and developing a Pan-African strategy for the ratification of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of persons with disabilities in Africa, or which we say the African Disability Protocol. And it is ADF that leads the work on the ADP ratification under this project that we have, the Helasia project, but has also expanded with other partnerships. So that's why this brief introduction on the INGO point of view, but I really want to leave the floor for Ms. Shitai Astawez, Advocacy Director of ADF, to elaborate on this Pan-African strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. van der Voorde. I'll hand over to Ms. Attawaz. If you are ready, whenever you're ready to present, you may take over the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Feneo. Thank you, Great, for the wonderful introduction. Yes, as the introduction, I'm Shitai Astawaz from the African Disability Forum. I am here to share how ADF, the African Disability Forum, is working and what strategies it uses to promote the ratification of the ADP. The African Disability Forum, ADF, initially established in 2014 in Nairobi, Kenya, but it took its legal form or get legal registration in 2017 in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. So the head office is now situated in Addis Ababa, to be also in a way strategic for our partnership, which is essential partnership with the AU. ADF is a continental membership organization of organizations of persons with disabilities in Africa. It's composed of its membership organization composed of organizations which are committed to the ADF vision, I quote, to see an inclusive Africa where all persons with disabilities and their families have their rights and voices respected, participate actively in the life of their communities and nations. Next slide, please. Great. The ADF mission is to promote the rights and inclusiveness of persons with disabilities and their families in Africa through empowerment and participation, unifying and amplifying their voices, and strengthening their organizations and partnership across the continent and beyond the continent at global levels as well. The next slide. When we said ADF is a membership, a continental membership organizations, then under its membership, it has now 44 national umbrella organizations of persons with disabilities and 8 continental organizations of persons with disabilities. In addition to that, 4 sub-regional organizations of persons with disabilities. That means the Eastern, Western, Southern, and the remaining, and also ADF. It's also now a member to the International Disability Alliance, IDA. Talking to now the effort towards getting the African Disability Protocol ratification, ADF has a clear campaign framework with properly splitted objectives. The campaign aims to establish systems for a continental-wide coordinated campaign to get the minimum required ratification for the protocol. So as the first objective, it's about raising the level of awareness on the continent, the importance of universal ratification of the African Disability Protocol. Then it's also about providing technical and logistical support to the regional and national OPDs to implement the national Ratify African Disability Protocol campaign. When we said technical and logistical support, it means in ADF's work or in its partnership in its work with collaborative and coordinated partnership to lead into building the capacities, creating the proper awareness, and also providing technical support to its member national organizations of persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. It's also about launching a dashboard to track ratification progress at the national and continental level, and also stepping up engagement with high influence decision makers of member states towards ratification of the African Disability Protocol. These are the ADF's well-splitted objectives to achieve the minimum required ratification for the ADP, the African Disability Protocol. Next slide, please. Next slide, great. What is then, when through this or through the implementation of the objectives or through our work to achieve the objectives, the next question could be maybe what then the expected outcomes. The expected outcomes for the ADF advocacy strategy has its own expected outcomes, that's ensuring at least 15 member states to deposited protocol ratification with the AU by July 31st, 2025, which means the African disability, which means if we maintain this, then the protocol will enter into force. Next slide. The strategy, the ADF strategy or framework for campaigning to get this needed ratification gives a clear direction on, for instance, campaign messaging, how the message crafted or designed, and also who the target audiences are, and also who the strategic partners for this big campaign are, and how to mobilize resources towards achieving this, and to also build the capacities of national organizations of persons with disabilities. I mean both national and also sub-regional organizations of persons with disabilities. And it also provides, the strategy also provide direction on the governance and coordination structure, as well as the grants, and it has also its own action plan. Next slide, please. So, yeah, before I conclude, I want to stress that ADF valued a meaningful participatory partnership and useful networking towards achieving what we set for or what we aimed for. That's now the very important or essential minimum ratification for this protocol to come into effect. So we valued partnership, we valued networking, and we are here for a meaningful participatory partnership, and also a meaningful participatory intervention on capacity building to the national and sub-regional organizations of persons with disabilities. I thank you.
Thank you so much to both panelists, Ms. van der Woerter and Ms. Atawes. Really appreciate your presentation. I think three takeaways can be considered from this presentation. Firstly, that a call to action on a continental level includes raising awareness, which this webinar aims to do, providing technical and logistical support, which involves the participation of multiple stakeholders, as well as ensuring engagement with very sort of influential participants within the member states, be it the government as well as the parliament as well, when it comes to ratifying and depositing the AEDRP. One thing that was mentioned by one of our attendees, Rod Howes, was that able-bodied politicians often fail to grasp the importance or the intersectionalities that exist with persons with disabilities, and how actions such as environmental hazards, etc., can exacerbate the sort of realities of those with disabilities. And this is something that I think will be interrogated a bit more by our next panelist. Our next panelist is Anna Shiri, who will give us an advocacy perspective, corporate advocacy from a SADC perspective. Notably, we do know that none of the countries within the SADC region have ratified the African Disability Protocol, and we hope that her presentation will give us a bit of insight as to how advocacy strategies can be developed and instituted to ensure or to encourage states in the SADC region to adopt the protocol. Ms. Anna Shahiri is the former senator representing persons with disability in the Zimbabwean Senate. She has a wealth of vast experience in leadership with undisputed experience in both public and private sectors, and working with diverse disability constituencies nationally, regionally, and internationally. She is a candid and seasoned human and disability rights champion in her own right. Currently, she is serving as the president of the National Council of Disabled Persons of Zimbabwe and has steered the organization to great success under her leadership. Mrs. Shiri, I hand over to you whenever you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Hello, everyone. About NCDPZ, or National Council of Disabled Persons of Zimbabwe. National Council of Disabled Persons of Zimbabwe is a cross-disability mass membership organization. Our primary objective is to ensure disability inclusion and self-representation of persons with disabilities in all facets of development. Founded in 1975 and registered as a private voluntary organization, it was founded in 1975 in response to and furtherance of the persistent campaigning and lobbying by persons with disabilities to be included as equal partners in the life and work of the mainstream society. NCDPZ's philosophy is that the rights of persons with disabilities are best promoted by persons with disabilities themselves, and that they have a right to represent their own interests and concerns in all spheres. Thus, the National Council of Disabled Persons of Zimbabwe carries out its outreach development work, focusing on 7 thematic areas that includes 1, sexual and reproductive health, livelihoods, water, hygiene and sanitation, disaster risk management, education and training, nutrition, human rights, and civic education. Advocacy. I'll start off by explaining what advocacy is. Advocacy is the active support of an idea or cause expressed through strategies and methods that influence the opinions and decisions of people and organizations. In the social and economic development context, the aims of advocacy are to create policies, laws, regulations, distribution of resources or other decisions that affect people's lives, and to ensure that such decisions lead to implementation. Then targets of advocacy. Advocacy is generally directed at policymakers as well as those whose decisions impact upon people's lives. These include the politicians like members of parliament, when they do their representational oversight role and legislative roles, and also when they are doing their public consultations, the government officials, public servants, private sector leaders, journalists, the media, development agencies or partners, the large NGOs or non-governmental organizations. Strategies for effective advocacy. 1, policy monitoring and public accountability. Almost all effective policy-related advocacy efforts commence with observation and monitoring of the implementation and effectiveness of policies already in the place. These might include Zimbabwe National Disability Policy or regulatory mechanisms to ensure the UNCRPD standards are met. Policy monitoring by CSOs may be in the form of one-off investigation into particular area of interest, may consist of 1, just a baseline start at commencement of a new policy, 2, follow-up studies to evaluate on results. A policy dialogue. Policy monitoring alone may prompt corrections to policy failure, but most CSOs carry their own ideas about what policies are desirable. They are interested in gaining influence earlier in the policy making process, hence being involved in policy dialogues with the bureaucrats and politicians. This is meaningful participation also of persons with disabilities will be also critical. CSOs have to engage in policy development processes such as the review of the national ICT policy, assessing its inclusivity stance. 3, campaigns for policy change. Policy campaigning is a goal-oriented advocacy in which civil society groups and coalitions aim to set the policy agenda rather than simply to monitor or respond to government policy making. It also involves taking action and initiative. CSO campaigns for policy change rarely achieve rapid results. They require patience, tenacity, courage, and conviction. It is essential to maintain clarity in communications. Goals should be clear and achievable. Messages should be compelling for those to whom they are intended. Calls to action should be specific and concise. Have good mobilization methods. Advocacy hence includes public demonstrations, protests, letter writing, lobbying, use of media and the internet, and legal action like petitions. 4, building the advocacy capacity of stakeholders groups. The people being faced by the barriers of whom the advocacy message is addressing are the major stakeholders. In this case, persons with disabilities will be the major stakeholders to any advocacy. The voice of the people has to be enhanced through any advocacy attempts. Social solidarity is key in advocacy as it gives an undependable basis of authentic representation of the voice of the marginalized groups in the society. This approach is empowering to the society. Conclusively, it is of paramount importance to note that monitoring and evaluation is key to any successful advocacy work. Policy dialogues as well as dialogues with local duty bearers are an effective advocacy strategy. Policy campaigns, although they are confrontational, can be utilized to bring about positive change, and building the advocacy capacity of stakeholder groups is also key. In addition, you can also make use of online platforms like the Facebook, Twitter, to also advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities. Thank you. Ngiyabonga. Tatenda.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Shiri. I think what is very interesting about your presentation is your emphasis on the need to sort of include other methods of advocacy beyond just litigation. We understand and we know, especially in Africa and particularly in the SADC region, access to legal measures are often quite inaccessible. And I suppose that reaching out to other sort of platforms, particularly those within the digital sphere, is a very, very important and crucial way to ensure that public participation is obtained and also that persons are informed about the protections offered under the African Disability Protocol. Another thing that was very interesting was the mention of the positive duties placed on both government organizations as well as civil society organizations to ensure the protection of rights of persons with disabilities, and that these sort of measures should not only be reactive in the instance where issues arise, but rather proactive in anticipation of any issues that may arise and in line with the DRP. The next segment of our webinar will be a question and answer portion. I have noted down a few questions already. However, I do encourage those who do have questions, be them live or typed out, to raise their hand. So should you have any questions that you would like to present, so should you want to say anything live, please raise your hand and then I will allow you to speak on the platform. Or should you have any questions that you would like to type out, we will also be monitoring those in the question and answer section. So I will begin with the first question, which was raised by one of our panelists. The question was raised by Themba Muimo. So there was two questions that was raised by them. First was basically ascertaining the link between the protocol and whatever government objectives that a state may have. How do we ensure that the protocol is presented to governments and to states in a way that aligns with the objectives that they already currently have for persons with disabilities? And I think that this question is directed or could best be answered by Ms. Nduta as well as Mr. Nechitini. And then I'll hand over while we refer to the second question raised by Temba Muimo.
Thank you for that question. So how did we ensure that the priority on ratification of the protocol aligns with the government priorities? I think first and foremost, for us in Kenya, we adopted an approach where we are working collaboratively with government in the sense that when we are pursuing inclusion of persons with disabilities, we have strived to ensure that we are speaking, we are sitting with the table, same table with government as a duty bearer, so that we also identify challenges together and work towards achieving solutions together. So that is the approach we've generally taken. We've also sensitized government that persons with disabilities are part and parcel of society. I know sometimes there's a lot of struggle when you're dealing with policymakers, and sometimes there's a tendency, or often persons with disabilities are seen as a different segment of the population, such that when you're planning for service delivery or implementation of a program, we want to resist the narrative that you must have a separate program for persons with disabilities. So for us, that's the approach we have taken, so that government has been gradually seeing persons with disabilities as part and parcel of any approach or approach to a strategy, or they're part and parcel of planning right from the start. So, and I think that is why it has been easy for them to ratify the convention. That is the same approach we took when the government ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So for us, the collaborative approach has worked, so that we are speaking together in the same table with government as a duty bearer, so that we are also avoiding to speak to ourselves and listening to our echoes when you're talking about challenges. So regardless of whichever issue we are pursuing, whether it is the issue of inclusive labor markets, whether it's access to health, whether it's review of a policy to include persons with disabilities, we have taken the approach to sit down with government and through a co-creation process, identify the challenges and work towards solutions together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nduta. The next question again is from Temba Muimo. And basically the question speaks to the protection of workers with disabilities. So how does the Labour International Organization help persons with disabilities within the workspace? I think this question can be posed to both Ms. Atawes and Ms. Converta. Please, one of you, whoever's ready to take the floor is all yours.
Can you please kindly repeat the question?
No worries. So the question basically speaks to the protection of workers with disabilities, the role that the Labor International Organization has in protecting workers with disabilities, especially considering how often they are unfairly treated within the workspace.
The International Labour Organization, it's very well known, use a strategy that they call a tripartite approach, and they mainly collaborate with national governments and also trade unions. But this is also up to the capacity of national organizations of persons with disabilities and the way they network and collaborate with both government and trade unions. It's also about awareness and also the creation of different jobs. And also it's about the rights of persons with disabilities, and particularly for those nations that ratified the convention, I mean the UN convention. It's about also following up and monitoring the implementation of Article 27 of the CRPD. So in addition to that, it's also about amplifying role models and talking and expanding what works and what doesn't work in this regard. It's also about resources, but I think in my understanding, we do have a huge difficulties and problems in the area of work and employment. I mean, when I say employment, it's decent employment as well, whereby a person with impairment or a person with disability could get a decent income, proper income, or income as equal as other employees as well. And it's also about supporting families sufficiently. So I think we are not yet there, but it needs collaboration, coordination, and networking, and also using working models or using amplifying role models and advocating for the rights, the equal rights of persons with disabilities in the area of work and employment. Yeah, thank you. This is all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Atawez. I see that we have a hand from Wilson. Wilson, did you want to add to any of the questions, or do you have a question from your end as well?
Actually, mine is a question. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation so far. So my question goes to the Africa Disability Forum, and I guess by extension to HI. As we undertake the advocacy campaigns on ratification, we end up receiving news from certain countries, some of them actually on the southern region of Africa, that they have ratified and deposited the instruments with the African Union Commission. I think we cannot confirm it officially, but we've heard from Mozambique, Congo, Cameroon, recently Burundi. Having being stationed at Ethiopia, where the seat of the African Union Commission is, what would you attribute the delay in updating the information on the ratification campaign to? And also, secondly, to your knowledge, is the data that we have now of 3 countries what we should be working with, or are there other countries other than Mali, Kenya and Rwanda that have ratified the instrument. Thanks.
We are working with member umbrella federations towards promoting the ratification. But in a continent such as Africa, whereby governments who have several priorities and particularly engaged with issues of internal conflict, I cannot say this responsibility is easy. It's not easy, but I think it's a work on progress. My opinion. We also know that having the AU by our side and with their commitment toward this would facilitate the process. So we are working in that regard. It's our strategic advantage, as you said, being seated in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, where the AU headquartered also working, put us in a very advantageous position for this advocacy. And wherever we work or with whom we partner, like for instance, the partnership project Great just mentioned at the Hail Asia and other upcoming partnership also. The ADP ratification is part and parcel of the processes for us. So we are hoping to get an increased ratification soon. For instance, in my recent follow-up engagement, Ethiopia puts this at the Council of Ministers. So we are hoping for that also facilitated as soon as possible. So this is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Atawes. I hope that your question was answered, Wilson. I will now move on to the next sort of point that was raised by Rod Howes, which is basically the lack of recognition of other types of disabilities. So usually recognition is given to physical disabilities. However, they mentioned that there are also mental and learning disabilities that are often not given acknowledgement to and that are often not addressed. I would like to raise this question to Mr. Neshutini. Maybe you can give us some insight on sort of this issue or this concern that was outlined by Rod.
Thanks, moderator. Yeah, it is true that the invisible disabilities are posing challenges, particularly when it comes to how one finds out a person with such particular disability. As I always say, reciprocity when it comes to disability is very important. It goes to be our own personal duty to ensure that we speak out for our own disabilities if they are not visible, and to make sure that we make ourselves known to the persons we are interacting with about the particular disability, so that they can support us. It needs to be firstly our own responsibility, then the next person's responsibility. However, we've also taken note that some countries do not recognize other disabilities systematically, so and that poses serious challenges, because you still have got to fight the system in order to have your disability recognized as a disability, so that you can properly advocate for that. For example, not so recently, we have albinism getting to be recognized by the United Nations, which was not recognized before. And at least that was a step forward to ensure that albinism is included in the list of disabilities, because others would have taken it before as a condition that does not require recognition as a disability. We can speak about epilepsy and so forth. So these are the disabilities that need to be listed, and we have countries sensitized as to how they should be handled and so forth. So advocacy should play itself very well out here, and the persons themselves should also be responsible for ensuring that they get to be recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nishitini, and I hope that your question or your concern was addressed and well answered. So the next question is from Neva Mujere, and basically it asks or speaks to the extent to which climate change management and the protection of persons with disabilities, how the two interlink, and whether and to what extent climate change management can also lead to the protection of persons with disabilities. So I will raise this to Mr. Juma. Could you please just address us on this concern raised by Neva? Thank you. If Mr. Juma is unable to respond, I will raise it to any of the other panelists, anyone who feels as though they have something to add to this concern with regards to climate change management. How do the two interlink? What are the intersectionalities between the two? And how can we ensure that climate change management also leads to the protection of persons with disabilities? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, the climate justice issue and disability rights issue do intersect, and it is important that when we are advocating for climate justice, we also include the needs of persons with disabilities, because we have seen that in most instances when we are advocating for climate justice, persons with disabilities are excluded. So it is important to include persons with disabilities. And also, whenever we are making policies, it is important to consider the needs of refugees and displaced persons with disabilities in those policies. That is actually our campaign this year at the Center for Human Rights. We are trying to figure out how persons with disabilities can be included in climate justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Juma. I hope that Neva, your question was well and sufficiently answered. The next question is from Manre Chikane, which speaks to the concern regarding the lack of ratification from SADC countries. So I'll raise this question to Mrs. Shiri. Is there any insight as to why none of the SADC countries have responded to this protocol and why none of them have ratified them? Thank you.
Excuse me, moderator, is the question directed to me?
The question is directed to Mrs. Shiri. I'm not sure if she was able to hear me. Mrs. Shiri, are you available and were you able to hear the question?
Hello, sorry, is it directed to Anna Shiri? I wanted to respond on the climate change, what the climate change also has brought about the natural disasters which affects persons with disabilities, and that persons with disabilities fail to access the information most of the information on disaster risk management will not be accessible to persons with disabilities. So, and also there's limited participation of persons with disabilities in disaster risk management, and the government, we urge all the governments to also include persons with disabilities from the village up to the national structures. Maybe that's my contribution on climate change. And also when it comes to self-representation in the disability committees, we need persons with disabilities to be active participants in all these committees of disaster risk management. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Shiri. Maybe then I can direct to you, Mr. Neshitini, on the question with regards to the failure of states to ratify the SADC protocol. Before you answer, I would just like to remind everyone that should you have any questions, please put them in the question and answer section. And if you have any comments, leave them in the chat box. We will be taking just a couple more questions before we move on to our conclusion. Thank you.
I trust moderator and colleagues, this would be a fair speculation, what I'm going to say, but I suppose the non-ratification by most of, if not all, SADC countries would be as a result of two things. First is the processes that entangle the process of ratification itself. For example, for some countries, we need to have domestic legislation that speaks to that particular treaty or whatever instrument we're talking about. And if we do not have that in place yet, it means that the ratification could be very difficult. The second scenario could be that the politicians themselves, as one of the panelists had said, are not so much clued up when it comes to those aspects, and therefore result in a lack of political will to fast track the ratification. Particularly because you find that these things are, in most cases, are put as secondary attention receiving aspects or treaties or instruments, and as a result, for them to be taken serious will require internal advocacy groups to put pressure on governments to ensure that they ratify. I can give this typical example. Last year, one organization in South Africa has had to take the parliament to court to ensure that we do have the correction of the 1978 Copyright Act, which was unconstitutional in the nature because it discriminated against persons with disabilities, particularly visual impairment or those that read using other formats. So the organizations in respective countries would have to put pressure on government to ensure that there's a speed up of ratification of the protocol.
Thank you so much, Andre. I hope that your question was well and sufficiently answered. I see that Hanok's hand was up, but he did leave a comment. I'll just read that first, and then I'll move on to Isaac's question. So Hanok's question is in two parts. Firstly, what obstacles do CSOs in Kenya face during their campaign for ratification, and what approaches have they undertaken to overcome those challenges? And secondly, how can SCOs collaborate on the continental level to achieve the shared objective of bringing the protocol to force? I think because it deals specifically with CSOs in Kenya, I'll hand over to Ms. Nduta to answer the question, but I can also see that the question would also be relevant to Mrs. Buerta and Ms. Atawes. So I think with the first question, I'll hand over to Ms. Nduta, and then with the second, either of the two other panelists may answer this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your question. The main challenge for us as CSOs, as OPDs in Kenya, has been one, meaningful engagement of underrepresented groups among the disability community. This includes persons with intellectual disabilities and those with psychosocial disabilities. As the disability movement in Kenya, inclusion of underrepresented groups is still a journey. Last month, we all participated, well, a number of us participated at the Conference of State Parties, and we have learned the importance of ensuring that we are leaving nobody behind. I'm so glad that at the Conference of State Parties, the listen, include and respect guidelines on including underrepresented groups who are launched. So as a movement, we are really happy. We continue to walk that journey. We have a number of organizations that represent underrepresented groups, but we are not at a level where we are saying that we are perfect. So that still continues to be a journey for us. Secondly, I would say awareness creation, you also require resources. And it doesn't stop now that Kenya has ratified the convention. We still have quite bits of work to ensure that we also create understanding or build capacities of our members and persons with disabilities in general across the country on issues of intersectionality that have been raised here. For instance, the issue of climate justice is important, and it's a rights issue, and how do we also make it an advocacy issue using the treaties that we have ratified. So this is an area that we have work to do, and we need to generate resources for this. What we've done, like I had explained earlier, the approach for us is working collaboratively with others, both the state and non-state actors, because if I have a little resources here and government brings a little resources and INGOs also playing a critical role. So these partnerships where we are working together is one way that we are ensuring that we might address the issue of scarcity of resources. And also in our ongoing programs, because we are a donor-funded organization, we ensure that we incorporate aspects around awareness creation on the protocol. So I'd say those are our main challenges and the ways in which we are addressing the issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nduta. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add, particularly with regards to the second question posed, which is how can CSO collaborate on a continental level to achieve the shared objective of bringing the protocol into force?
Hello. Can I come in?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah, Sally has put it well. It's just an addition to what she has already said. It's also, I mean, for us, it should be using what we have, using it properly and economically. It's clear that we do have issues of technical capacity and financial capacity. So we need to collaborate and to restructure maybe ourselves towards using this economically, whatever we have. And it's also about like in mitigating now the challenges we are facing at least get the minimum required ratification, I think we should also collaborate in tapping more resources, and also like to tap more resources, we have to collaborate to see where a potential partnership could be initiated. So tapping resource, knowing and collaborating to initiate a meaningful partnership, because we have those scarcities. So this is just an addition to what Sami has already said. Thank you.
Thank you so much both to Ms. Nduta and Ms. Atawes. We have one last question before we conclude, and I think that this question is very much an elaboration on the question that was previously asked by Henok. So Isaac Smale asks whether or not it is actually realistic to expect most African states to ratify and implement both the UN CRPD as well as the African Disability Protocol. And the reason why Isaac's asked this question is owing to the unavailability of resources, particularly within the African context. So I think this question really is posed to the entire panel. So whoever from the panel is willing to answer this or give their insight, multiple panelists can also give their insights. This would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
If I could go first, for us in Kenya, so the messaging we had as CSOs is that the Africa Disability Protocol is not coming really to compete, you know, or take the place of other treaties that Kenya has ratified, for instance, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It is for the protocol to be viewed as complementing and supporting, you know, strategies that the government already has in place, or frameworks, policy frameworks that the government is already implementing. So, for instance, yes, the government is already implementing the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and it has already given one report to the UNCRPD committee in 2015. So it's to see what else, what is the addition or is the advantage that the protocol brings to support implementation of policy frameworks for advancement of rights of persons with disabilities in Kenya. So it's not that the protocol is adding on, you know, additional burdens or competing with other policy frameworks, but it's to bring in the complementarity within the existing frameworks. So that is the messaging that we have taken. And like I also said earlier, it is important to link international treaties to what the government is already doing, to align international treaties to development programs. So for example, in Kenya, we have the Vision 2030, which is the flagship development program. So from our perspective and where we sit, the role of international treaties that Kenya has ratified is on articulating rights of persons with disabilities. And this is about meaningful involvement, aiding to drive the message that persons with disabilities are part and parcel of citizens. They have rights as anyone else in society. So really the role of these international treaties is to articulate rights of persons with disabilities. It's not to say persons with disabilities are bringing on different sets of rights, but it is to bring in the narrative that persons with disabilities must be seen as rights holders, they must be seen from a human rights approach, that while government is delivering services, for instance, health, we must make sure that health services are accessible to persons with different disabilities, just like they would be accessible to all the rest of the citizenry. So we are not introducing a new set of laws or interventions for persons with disabilities. It's to say that persons with disabilities must be included as beneficiaries to development programs by government, and that service delivery must be made accessible. So the purpose of international treaties is to articulate these rights for persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nduta. I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything to add. If not, then I would just like to direct both the panelists and attendees to our chat box, where we have included our hashtag ratify ADRP policy brief. You may also check the Center for Human Rights website, which will have more information with regards to our advocacy campaign, as well as other information with regards to ways in which CSOs can go about encouraging the respective member states in ratifying the ADRP. If there are no further comments from any of the panelists, I will now hand over to Paul Juma for concluding remarks. Thank you so much to all of the panelists and to all of the attendees. I do believe that this was a very invigorating session. It was a very lively session. We can see from all of the comments that were left in the chat box and all of the questions that were asked. And this is the kind of sort of conversations that we want to spark in our initiative towards ratifying the African Disability Protocol. Over to you, Paul. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sekati. I am making these closing remarks on behalf of Ms. Diana Msipa, who is the manager at Disability Rights Unit. So the webinar has been very important and is important to the center and Africa as a whole. The aim is to get African states to ratify the African Disability Rights Protocol. That is one of the main agendas of the Disability Rights Unit. The other works of the Disability Rights Unit include providing technical support to stakeholders, capacity building, and awareness raising on the rights of persons with disabilities across Africa. The next event is the African Disability Rights Conference, which will be held in November. The call for papers is out. You can check our website. We also do publish articles in the African Disability Rights Journal. So with those few remarks, I wish to thank the presenters for the wonderful and informative presentations, the participants for actively participating in the session today, team members who made this event possible, Nare, Florence, Sekati, Elim, Manjang, Omar, and Farirai. Thank you so much for the wonderful work you have done. Thank you also to the communication team for your technical assistance and the center leadership. So thank you so much, and do have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you so much to everybody. The call for papers link has also been attached to the chat box for your perusal, but if there's nothing else from anybody, then I will be ending the call. Thank you so much to all of the attendees and to all of the panelists, and have a wonderful afternoon to those within the SADC region, and morning to those elsewhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and bye. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.